When you read Genesis chapter 1 all the way through Genesis chapter 4, you discover that Satan brought down Eve. Eve brought down Adam. Sin brought down Cain. And the whole world has been going down ever since. I want to spend our time together this morning talking about that downward spiral. What happens when humanity is on its own and behaves as though there is no God? In verse 17 down through verse 22, as we look at this downward spiral or this downward fall, the first thing you'll find in those verses is the camouflage of a downward fall. You know what camouflage is, don't you? You think of it most commonly in military terms. Soldiers will wear camouflage so that they blend into their environment so that their enemy cannot see them. You also think about this word camouflage in hunting terms. Hunters wear camouflage so that whatever they are preying on or hunting cannot see them. They want to blend in with their surroundings so that they become virtually invisible to those who are around them. Let me share something with you for free. If you go fishing, ain't no need of wearing camouflage because the fish ain't looking up at the water. You know, it's almost, that's like putting on perfume to take a picture. Ain't nobody gonna smell it through the lens. The camouflage of a downward fall. As graphic as this may seem, I feel that it is appropriate to help you to understand how dangerous sin is and how subtle sin behaves. In countries and on continents where there are large sheep herding operations, one of the major enemies of sheep is wolves. Sheep herders have learned a tactic to deal with wolves who would devour their sheep. They take sheep's blood, mix it with water, put it in a bucket, put a knife on the inside of the bucket with the blade of the knife facing upward. It is a double-edged knife, sharp on the left and sharp on the right. They suspend the knife in the middle of the water until the ice freezes solid, the ice and mixture of sheep's blood. They then take that block of ice with the knife camouflaged on the inside, and they set it out for the wolves to find it. The wolves, immediately attracted by the scent of the blood, come to the block and began licking the mixture of ice and blood. Unbeknownst to them, there's a blade on the inside. By the time they hit the blade, they're so intoxicated by the blood and their tongues have been so desensitized until they do not recognize that they have hit the blade, cut their own tongues, and bleed to death. That's the way sin is. Satan rarely comes at you with a blowout. He majors in slow leaks. See, you're looking for the devil to be bold and glaring with a big sign written across their forehead, I'm the devil. I'm trifling. I'm low down. I'm no good. I'm going to hurt you and it won't even bother me. People don't show up in your life that way. They show up subtly. They show up simply. When the devil crept up on Eve in the garden, he didn't shout at her. He smooth talked her. He might have had a slight Italian accent. You read it in English, it's Satan saying to Eve, hath God said that you may eat of the trees of this garden? And Eve responded, the Lord says we may eat of every tree of the garden, but there is one tree that we are not to eat of. We are not even to touch it. And then Satan responded that you will not die by eating of that tree. There is something that God is withholding from you. He said that thing smooth. Hath God said you may eat of the trees of the garden? He said it smooth. The devil never shows up wearing a sign, though I wish he would. But he shows up subtly. He shows up simply. And before you know it, he has taken you further than you wanted to go. And it is costing you more than you were willing to pay. The camouflage of a downward fall, which means that when we live this life, there are some things that seem so harmless until it doesn't even register to us. Let me give you 6 of them that are contained in verse 17 down through verse 22. Here's the first thing that the Lord allows in this world to occur. And if you're not careful, it can go from a good thing to a bad thing. Here's the first one: success. Success can start off good and turn out bad. Look at what you find in verse 7. The Bible says that God, in verse 6, God spoke to Cain, why this tantrum? Why this sulking? If you do well, won't you be accepted? If you don't do well, sin is lying in wait for you, ready to pounce. It's out to get you. You've got to master it, which means that if your heart is in the wrong place, the devil is watching you, looking for an opportunity to destroy you. Watch how you find it in verse 17. Cain slept with his wife. She conceived and had Enoch. He then built a city and named it after his son Enoch. Sounds so harmless. He's successful. This is the same Cain who killed his brother Abel. Now the Lord has allowed him to become so strong, so mighty, so successful until he builds his own city. Sounds like a baller to me. Success is a part of the camouflage of a downward spiral. Not only success, pleasure is a part of the camouflage of a downward fall. You find it in verse 18 and verse 19. Cain slept with his wife. She conceived, had Enoch. He then built a city and named it after his son Enoch. Enoch had Irad. Irad had Mehujael. Mehujael had Methuselah. Ain't you glad you wasn't brown? Because Methuselah and Williams don't go together. Methuselah had Lamech. Watch verse 19. Lamech married 2 wives, Adah and Zillah. This is the first reference in the Bible to polygamy or bigamy. One wasn't enough. Lamech said, I want 2 of them. He had never seen anybody with 2 wives. But he decided that he wanted so much pleasure until he wanted 2 of them. Satan is smooth. Hey, catch this. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And his position was, there's nobody here to stop me. There's nobody here to confront me or correct me. And I can have all the wives that I want. And he said, I'm going to get me 2. The devil was slow walking him down, and he didn't even recognize it. Success is the camouflage of a downward fall. Pleasure is the camouflage of a downward fall. Here's a third one: industry. Industry can be the camouflage of a downward fall. You find it in verse 20. This is after he has married his two wives. Then the Bible says, Adah gave birth to Jabal, the ancestor of all who live in tents and herd cattle. That's industry. This is the first reference that we have of someone who essentially has their own business, their own cow or beef herding business. Industry. It's fine in and of itself, but when you take God out of the equation, it becomes dangerous. Let me give you a fourth one. Not only can success lead or be camouflage for your downward fall, not only pleasure and industry, but entertainment. Entertainment. Some of us have too much fun. So Adah gave birth to Jabal, the ancestor of all who live in tents and herd cattle. Watch his brother, whose name was Jubal, the ancestor of all who play the lyre and flute. That lyre was a guitar type instrument, and this is the first reference that we have in the Bible of people being involved with musical instruments. It's entertainment. Here's the next one: machinery. Machinery can be camouflage for a downward fall. It's right there in the text. After you read about Jabal and Jubal, that's some serious names. Then Zillah gave birth to Tubal-Cain, who worked at the forge making bronze and iron tools. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Tubal-Cain became one who fashioned things out of metal. He was an iron worker, a metal worker, which means he was involved in the early stages of producing machinery. Success can be camouflage for a downward fall. Pleasure can be camouflage for a downward fall. Industry can be camouflage. Entertainment can be camouflage. Machinery can be camouflage. Let me give you the last one. Attractiveness can be camouflage. The last thing you read in verse 22 is that Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. You know what that literally means in Hebrew? She wasn't just beautiful. It literally means in Hebrew, the beautiful. She was a bad mama jamma, is what the text is saying. She was a she was a brick house. She was mighty, mighty. Okay. That's how we gonna do it. Y'all don't, okay. All right. Don't let me come down your street. And don't make me sing it, because some of y'all act like you don't know what it is. Pastor, all of these things that you have mentioned, all 6 of them, and I believe that there are 6 of them intentionally. 6 is the number of man, the number of flesh, the number of humanity. There are 6 of them specifically mentioned in verse 17 through verse 22, and all of them seem harmless at face value. Success, nothing wrong with it when you have it in the proper perspective. Pleasure, nothing wrong with it when you have it in the proper perspective. Industry, entertainment, machinery, attractiveness, nothing wrong with them when you hold them in the proper perspective. But let me warn you, the moment you take God out of anything, you start going down. Have you ever read the book of Jonah? In Jonah chapter 1 and verse 3, I like reading it in the King James Version. In Jonah's life, you discover that when Jonah tried to get away from God, every step he took was a downward step. Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord and went down to Joppa. and he found the ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Every step he made was a downward step. When he got on the ship, he went down into the hull of the ship. When the ship got rocky, they threw him overboard, and then he went down into the sea. God sent a whale to swallow him. Then he went down into the belly of the whale. Every step he made was a downward step. And anything you try to do without God eventually is going down. Why? Because even your success can turn into pride. Which means sometimes the better some of us do, the bigger our heads get. Our success can turn into pride. Your pleasure can turn into lust. You can take a good thing and turn it into a bad thing. Your industry can turn into greed. Your entertainment can turn into intoxication. Hey, because sometimes you sitting somewhere hearing good music, and the first thing the devil tell you is, this will sound better if you had a little something in you. You just had a little something to kind of take the edge off. You don't want to get tore up from the floor up, but just a buzz. And for long, you done go from buzzing to stumbling over yourself. Because that's how the devil works. Entertainment can turn into intoxication. Machinery that starts off as instruments of work can become instruments of war. Attractiveness, if you're not careful, can turn into vanity. Well, can't nobody tell you nothing. Too cute to pray. Too pretty to praise. Too handsome to hold your hands up. That's when attractiveness gets to the place that it becomes vanity. Pastor, you say these sound strange. Let me put them in a closer context. All of these things can occur in a person. They can occur in a church. They can occur in a family. And God knows they can occur in a country. Look at America. Its founding was initialized by colonists fleeing religious persecution who wanted to practice Christianity in a biblical way. They came to this new land of America. In the South, the primary method of survival was farming because the soil was quite fertile and some of any and everything could grow in the South. And what did they find when they got here? Success, pleasure, industry, entertainment. They made machinery and reveled in attractiveness. But look at what it did to America historically. America's success turned into pride. How do you discover something when there are people already living here when you get here? So the Native Americans were thrown off of their own land, pushed into what they call reservations. And they were here when we got here. We had dinner with them. That's why we have Thanksgiving every November. Somebody in here real thankful for the American Indians because you can't wait to November to get you some chitlins. Success turned into pride. Pleasure turned into lust. It started off in the world. Hey, some of us remember that you could tell when you had gotten to the bad side of any town because people didn't dress the same. women especially. When I remember it throughout my childhood. I knew when I was riding around with my dad that we had gotten on a street that we wasn't supposed to be on. Because there was some people walking on the street wearing some stuff I ain't never seen before. And you used to be able to tell. Now, you don't know if you're in the club or the mall. Because outfits are all the same. And watch how slick the devil is. It has crept into the church. So that now the people that we call our church leaders don't care how they look in the presence of God's people. And look how subtly it happened. Look how subtle it was. 25 years ago, you had what you call church clothes. 2019, for a whole lot of folks, ain't no such thing as church clothes. Am I saying you got to get all dressed up to come to church? That's not the point. What I'm saying is that whatever you wear to church should not be a distraction to the people who are around you. That's the measuring stick. One of the things you should never say when you're getting dressed for church is, I'm sure going to snap necks when I hit the front door. Not turn heads, snap necks. Somebody's going to be unconscious, when I hit the door. That is not how you get dressed for church, male or female. It's occurring in both realms. Men wearing low-cut shirts in church, chest hairs showing. Ain't nobody come here for that. And if you did, you came to the wrong place. You done greased yourself all up. And you got the nerve to have a chain on with a cross on the end of it. Jesus ain't even on your mind. Pleasure can turn into lust. Industry, look, America, turned into greed. And I struggle this day, wondering how people could sit up in church every Sunday morning, teach Sunday school, read and preach the Bible, and go home and terrify men, women, and children that they enslaved and treated as property. It was greed. It was initially not hatred, it was greed. And here's how dangerous greed is. In order for slavery to have taken place on American soil, the way that it took place on American soil meant that slave owners had to view their slaves as being less than human, which caused them to treat them accordingly. Greed, so that they could have free labor in order to maximize their profits. Industry turned into greed. Entertainment has turned into intoxication. Some of the stuff we watch in 2019, and you can binge watch it, for hours. You wouldn't, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have even allowed it on your TV screen. And now we can sit for hours and watch it. Machinery, the same metal that could be used to fashion an instrument of work, we fashion those instruments into instruments of war. You never would have been able to control an entire race of people in a country were it not for instruments of war. And here we are now, America, intoxicated with weapons of war. Machinery can turn into instruments of war. Attractiveness can turn into vanity. May God have mercy on America and its vanity. Here's all I'm getting at. When you're going down, sometimes the descent is so subtle until it camouflages the fact that you're actually going down. You're going down so smoothly and so subtly until it hasn't even dawned on you that you're going down. The camouflage of a downward fall. Let me show you now the consequence of a downward fall. It is in verse 23 through verse 24, the consequence of a downward fall. So here you have Cain. Cain has children. His children have children. Then you get all the way to the fourth great grandson, Lamech. In verse 23, Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me, you wives of Lamech. Hear me out. I killed a man for wounding me, a young man who attacked me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, for Lamech it's 77. Let's put this into context. When you begin reading in verse 10, you will remember that after Cain killed his brother Abel, God pronounced judgment on him and told him that there would be consequences as a result of his sin. There in the beginning with verse 10. God said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is calling to me from the ground. From now on, you'll get nothing but curses from this ground. You'll be driven from this ground that has opened up its arms to receive the blood of your murdered brother. You'll farm this ground, but it will no longer give you its best. You'll be a homeless wanderer on earth. Cain said to God with his sorry self and his sinful self and his selfish self. That was last Sunday. Cain said to God, my punishment is too much. I can't take it. You've thrown me off the land and I can never again face you. I'm a homeless wanderer on earth and whoever finds me will kill me. God told him, no. Anyone who kills Cain will pay for it 7 times over. God put a mark on Cain to protect him so that no one who met him would kill him. Cain left the presence of God, lived in no man's land east of Eden. Fast forward generations ahead to the fourth great grandson of Cain, great, fourth great grandson of Cain, Lamech. Now, obviously, there is a conversation that occurred in Genesis 4 that we are not privy to. What most scholars believe, because it seems strange for Lamech to just bust out in a speech about having killed someone. Most scholars believe that what has occurred in Genesis 4 is that Lamech killed someone who attacked him. Now, we're not told the complete nature or severity of the attack. Lamech says that it was a young man who had attacked him and wounded him, which means by this time Lamech must have considered himself too old to be fighting. And most scholars believe that he probably took a metal instrument that his son Tubal-Cain had made and used it to kill the young man who attacked him. Word spread of Lamech's attack, and the unwritten part of Genesis 4 is that there was talk in the community from the family of the young man that he killed. And the talk was they were going to get Lamech for what he had done to their son, their brother, their nephew, or their uncle, or their cousin. Because you know, some of us, grew up in environments where everybody was cousins. And if you bothered one of them, you had to deal with all the cousins. Wasn't no blood between some of them people, but you had to deal with the whole family if you bothered with one. And Ada and Zillah had heard the news that somebody was out to kill their husband, and they became afraid. So Lamech says, let me set the record straight. I did kill somebody who attacked me. He tells me in verse 23, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me, you wives of Lamech. He had no business with two of them in the first place. Listen to me, you wives of Lamech. Hear me out. I killed a man for wounding me, a young man who attacked me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, for Lamech is 77. Now here's what he's saying. He's saying, I killed a man in what he is describing as self-defense. Cain, his great-great-great-great-grandfather, killed his own brother simply out of envy and anger. So what Lamech is saying is, if God will avenge anybody who touched Cain, who killed a man out of envy and anger, if God will avenge his murderer 7 times, he tells his wives, don't worry about nobody killing me. Because if somebody killed me, God would avenge them 77 times. You know what I'm gonna know? Who told you that? Not part of the outline that's going to be on the screen. There's several things in all of this I think that you should pay attention to. Lamech had 2 wives. This is the first record of bigamy or polygamy in the scriptures, but not the last, but this is where it started. Be careful what you tolerate, because it starts off as a drizzle, and before you know it, it'll grow into a hurricane. Be careful what you put up with. Be careful what you tolerate. Because it starts off a grain of sand, and before you know it, it's the rock of Gibraltar. Be careful what you put up with. Girl, I'll knock you out. Be careful. What you put up with starts off as words, ends up as actions. Be careful what you put up with. If you won't do it, I'll find somebody who will. I need a real man. Be careful what you put up with. Starts off with words. The Bible says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Sometimes you say stuff, you say, I wonder where that came from. I don't. Started in your heart. That's why it could come out of your mouth, because you allowed it to fester in your heart. Be careful what you put up with. Be careful what you fantasize about. And you say, I can play with it in my mind because I'm never going to get the chance to act on it in person. When the reality is, the devil is so slick. He'll create an opportunity for you to do what started in your heart. But if you never fed that thing in your heart, it never would have shown up in your life and become contagious for you and all those who come after you. Be careful what you play with. And then he says, he killed a man, a young man, who wounded him or attacked him. And here's the natural question. Did the force meet the standard of the attack? If somebody hit you, why'd you have to kill them? I know we have in our culture a dangerous law. I met the man who wrote it. Right here in the state of Florida, we have a dangerous law called the Stand Your Ground law, which is a method of defending yourself should you ever be arrested for murder. We already had in America what is called the castle doctrine. That means if somebody is in your house trying to do you bodily harm that could result in your death, that by law, and this has been on the books for decades, if not centuries, by law, you don't have to retreat from your own house. You have the right to defend your own castle. But stand your ground says that if you are in fear of your life, that means ain't nobody even got to touch you. But you can claim that I made you so afraid until you used deadly force. And we've seen that law go sideways right here in our country. When George Zimmerman, at the age of 29, killed Trayvon Martin at the age of 17, after he was told by law enforcement to stop following him, George Zimmerman, who had taken mixed martial arts classes, carrying a Kel-Tec PF-9 semi-automatic pistol, gets into an altercation with a 17-year-old boy and says that the boy overpowered him, got him on the ground, and started beating him savagely. I'll tell you how big of a lie all that is. Anybody who has ever owned a firearm or anyone who has a concealed carry permit will tell you, if you're running after somebody in the dark, ain't no way your gun is not already in your hand. Let me just put that out there. And you say you waited with your 29-year-old self until a 17-year-old who was running from you, you say you waited until he got you on the ground, beating on you, and then you pulled the gun? And jurors believed it and acquitted him, and he's been in trouble ever since. So did Lamech's force meet the level of aggression that came at him? We don't know. And then Lamech, who told you that what God said to Cain applies to you? Here is the consequence of a downward fall: self-righteousness. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, don't worry about nobody bothering with me. If somebody lays a hand on me, God will show retribution 77 times. Because if he would protect Cain, certainly he's going to protect Lamech. Who told you that? When did you get to the place where you thought you were such hot stuff? Self-righteousness. When you get to the point that you think you are above all laws. Self-righteous. You see the camouflage of a downward fall. You see the consequence of a downward fall. Last thing, and I'm done. I want you to see the contrast to a downward fall. None of this is written to us by accident. It is all very deliberate, that God will give us the record of how quickly and how far the descendants of Cain fell. But watch the contrast in verse 25 and verse 26. Adam. Now, we've spent the middle of the chapter talking about Cain's descendants. Then Moses, who's writing this, goes all the way back to Adam and says, Adam slept with his wife again. She had a son whom she named Seth. She said, God has given me another child in place of Abel, whom Cain killed. And then Seth had a son whom he named Enosh. That's when men and women began praying and worshiping in the name of God. Hey, watch this. The first thing that Cain got was success. He built a city and named the city after his son Enoch. Get this. If you were really sorry for what you had done to your brother Abel, why didn't you name the city after him? If you were really appreciative for God giving you another chance, why didn't you name the city after God? But when you're wrapped up in yourself, all you see is yourself. The fallen line of Cain, because Cain killed his godly brother Abel. And what God does in verse 25 and verse 26 is to give them another good son. They had a bad son named Cain whose family line was just as bad as he was. And God says, I'm going to give you, human race, another chance. He gives them Seth. And if you follow Seth's family tree, it leads all the way to Jesus. That's the contrast. Which means, ma'am, which means, sir, the world around you may be nasty, but you don't have to be nasty like the world. The devil would have you to believe that you need to get folks before they get got. That before anybody can get you, you need to get them. You need to be the first one in line. You say, I ain't going to let them run over me. And God is saying, just because people around you are low down, you don't have to be low down like them. We are told in Psalm 37 that the wicked will appear to prosper. Just give it time. It's going down. Don't get bent out of shape over what you say. My neighbor sell drugs. That's what you say. My neighbor sell drugs. But they eat good. They drive good. They buy anything they want with the drug money. And you next door eating beanie weenies out of can. You start wondering, I wonder what if. Hey, you know what you'll hardly ever find? A retired drug dealer. You won't find them in the drop program. Because if you stay in it long enough, you end up in one of three places: prison, cemetery, or hooked on your own product. But if you do it God's way, you don't have to look over your shoulder. You can go in and out of airports, not wondering whether or not you got some residue on you somewhere that dog is going to sniff. I was in an airport, and Dr. Cornell West was in the airport with me. We were standing in the security line. I was carrying my briefcase with my Microsoft Surface. It's essentially a laptop computer, but it functions like a tablet, very small, very thin. I had that on the inside of my laptop, and they had already announced that if you had a laptop, take it out and put it in a separate bin. Well, I say this is a tablet. Certainly, they're just going to let me go through. So I put the briefcase on the scanner, and they rolled it in and caught that the computer was in it. They pushed it back out, told me to take the computer, put it in a separate bin. I did, and then they held me for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And Dr. West spoke to me from the other side. He said, "Are you all right, brother?" I'm like, Dr. West is finna shut it down right here in the airport. This is civil rights for real. He take this thing seriously. You got to be careful about this life that we live, because things can turn so quickly. And whatever you selling, you can't even go to the airport because you might set something off. Looking over your shoulder. Always wondering if somebody's out to get you. Don't know who you can trust. But if you do it God's way, you might not get there as fast, but you'll get there. And when you get where the Lord wants you to go, you don't have to worry about somebody else taking credit for it. You just thank and praise Him for the great things that He has